Aloha, everybody. It's Lorraine again with the IT department. I wanted to share some information because over the past 30 days, this organization has faced repeated probing attempts that align with common enterprise attack patterns observed across legacy and mixed environment systems. While full system replacement and upgrades are not feasible, attackers can still gain access through misconfigurations, weak access controls, and exposed services. This quick overview explains how attackers gain access, while privilege escalation is critical, and how to mitigate these risks using compensating controls rather than upgrades. The objective is not to teach exploitation, but to improve risk awareness, decision making, and governance. So, how attackers gain initial access? This common initial access methods is just a high level overview. I want to make note that attackers rarely hack a system in one step. Instead, access is typically achieved through chain techniques, beginning with reconnaissance and moving towards exploitation. Common initial access methods include surface and port enumeration, exploitation of legacy protocols like RPC, the remote procedure call, SMB, the server message block, and NFS, the network file system. Web service abuse, HTTP and HTTPS, and credential exposure through misconfigurations that we mentioned before. This phase focuses on discovering weaknesses, not exploiting them immediately. From a defensive perspective, attackers typically gain initial access through one or more of the following pathways: human exploration, like phishing or impersonating, exposure of vulnerable services, like legacy web or network services, misconfiguration, like excessive privileges and insecure defaults, chained weaknesses that individual appear low risk but collectively enable a compromise. Once access is achieved, attackers attempt to escalate privileges, establish persistence, and avoid detection. Privilege escalation occurs when an attacker gains higher permission than initially authorized, often moving from standard user account to administrative or root access. This step is critical because it enables full system control, persistence, and lateral movement. Yikes! But here's where we assume there's a way to mitigate without upgrading or replacing the system. SUID is set user ID, and SGID set the group ID. These are special settings on certain system programs that allow them to run with higher privileges than the user who launches them. In simple terms, these programs are allowed to temporarily act as an administrator so the system can perform necessary tasks. While some of these programs are legitimate and required for daily operations, many systems, especially the older ones, retain far more of these privileged programs than necessary. So we need to remove the SUID and SGID binaries that allow executables to run with the privileges of the file owner or group rather than the executing user. While some SUID and SGID binaries are required for legitimate system functionality, unnecessary or misconfigured instances significantly increase the risk of privilege escalation. And we will be adhering to the NIST framework when we remove these binaries. Why is this important? Well, attackers frequently target the SUID and the SGID binaries because vulnerabilities in these programs can grab elevated privileges, including root access. Reducing the number of such binaries decreases the system's attack surfaces. And per CISA in 2023, it limits the post-exploitation impact. Because upgrades are not an option, the mitigation strategy relies on defensive configuration and monitoring, network segmentation, limit access to legacy services using firewalls and host-based rules. service minimization, disabled used, unused daemons and RPC services, and access controls like enforcing IP based restrictions and authentication hardening, logging and monitoring by centralizing the logs to detect reconnaissance and privilege misuse, and compensating controls by using the intrusion detection and file integrity monitoring. Let's talk about the taxonomy of common attack families. The first one I'm going to discuss is the buffer overflow. It's a vulnerability where a program writes more data to memory than allocated. Common in legacy software, buffer overflows can allow attackers to execute arbitrary code and can be exploited in the initial access and privilege escalation. So let's talk about the privilege escalation here. It's a technique used to gain higher permission than originally authorized. It's often the most critical step, enabling full system compromise for post-exploitation and control expansion. Now let's talk about the rootkits. Malware designed to conceal attackers' presence and their activity. Rootkits undermine the system's trust by hiding processes, files, or users. And the category it lives in is in persistence and defense evasion. The Trojans are malicious software disguised as legitimate, commonly delivered through social engineering and used to establish initial access. The category it lives in is initial access and payload delivery. The backdoors are hidden mechanisms that bypass authentication. This is to ensure attackers can regain access even after partial remediation, and the category is persistence. Viruses are malwares that propagates by infecting other files. They can degrade system integrity and facilitate lateral spread. This category is in propagation and impact. Let's talk about the ROP here, return-oriented programming. It's an advanced exploitation technique that reuses legitimate code. It allows the attackers to bypass modern memory protections. Its category is advanced exploitation. And we're going to talk about the common social engineering attacks. It's a psychological manipulation to influence the behavior of the user. This is through phishing and impersonation and remains the most frequent entry point in modern attacks. Initial access and human exploitation is its category. And just remember, everything that is posted about the company on social media or about the individuals is public knowledge, and those things can be used against the person and the company to impersonate a legitimate request. Let's talk now again more about reconnaissance and enumeration attacks. These are techniques used to collect information about system services and users without direct exploitation. Attackers identify open ports, software versions, and exposed services to determine viable attack paths. Its category is pre-exploitation and information gathering. Sometimes we have no idea how long they're sitting, watching, and gathering information on the company. So, like if they're sitting and watching and doing port scanning and service fingerprinting, these are examples of this type of attack. Moving to the privilege escalation attack that we touched on that a bit earlier. These exploits allow attackers to gain elevated permissions, often abuse weak permissions, misconfigured binaries, or kernel flaws. The category is the post-exploitation. An example of this would be the SUID that we talked about, abusing that, writable system files. And by closing this up and getting rid of some of these unused or misconfigured binaries, we will be in adherence to the CISA, the 2023 framework. So the network file system attacks, the NFS, are exploitation of improperly secured shared file systems. The attackers mount remote share to read or modify sensitive files. They can laterally move data access. Mount D and RPC bind abused. And we talked about that in our previous video based on some of the attacks that have been happening. So let's go into the web application attacks. These attacks target web services in our applications, especially in the legacy web servers. They may expose outdated modules, weak encryptions, or insecure scripts. The initial access and exploitations is where they live. An example of this would be directory traversal and insecure CGI. And finally, we're going to talk about the remote procedure call, the RPC. It's an abuse of the RPC service that act as service directories. It enables the attackers to enumerate and target high-risk system daemons. The category that it lives in is enumeration and exploitation. An example of this, per the NIST framework in 2020, is the RPC bind, StatD, and MountD. These categories and attack techniques are based on function and phase of the attack life cycle, enabling a clear understanding of risk. So our key takeaways are most attacks succeed due to misconfigurations, not advanced exploits. Human risk is as critical as technical risk, requiring executive support for training and policy enforcement. Privilege escalation transforms minor access into major breaches. Risk can be significantly reduced without replacing systems. Visibility, segmentation, and least privilege are critical controls. Configuration monitoring and governance controls remain effective even without upgrades. So finally, I wanted to show you the reference list that I was referring to throughout this information so that you can research yourself, but please feel free to ask any questions. Aloha.